Okay, great.
Can I have your attention, please? We're not going to wait any longer. Some people may come a little bit later, but I think it's time to start. You can't hear me? Oh, wait a minute. I didn't know I had a microphone. Can you hear me better now? Okay. We're going to start now. We're not going to wait for those who are going to come later. Some may not even show up, but I think for the benefit of those who did come on time, I think we should get started. Anyway, I want to welcome everyone to the finale, actually, of the Yom Yerushalayim celebration this weekend. Once again, I'm going to have a virtual tour with Shulie Mishkim, and this trip will take us to the underground Yerushalayim, the archaeology of the Jewish quarter, and what was discovered in the major excavations after the Six-Day War. Those of you who have previously gone on tour with Shulie know what they're in for, and they're for a very, very special treat. However, before we begin, I have to give a special thank you to Larry Fish, who has taken the time to set up the communication system between Israel and the Century Village, and to make it possible for us to enjoy this program. And then I have to give a thank you to my partner, Harriet Brick, who has set up the tables outside and refreshments, which you will enjoy afterwards. And to Gary Nadich, who's not here at this point, but he went out of the way to go ahead and help us buy the food. So without further ado, at this point, I'd like to get started. And I hope that you will enjoy this trip to Yerushalayim. Let us begin the show.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I want to know if I'm going to get any refreshments.
Can you hear it? Can you hear it? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to share my screen. And we are going to start doing our slideshow. Okay, so I called this virtual tour Underground Jerusalem. It has an even better name in Hebrew. If your Hebrew is good, Yerushalayim Shel Mata, right? We talk about Yerushalayim Shel Mala, heavenly Jerusalem. We also talk about earthly Jerusalem, Yerushalayim Shel Mata, on the bottom. But this is really earthly Jerusalem because this is going underneath the ground. Now, you guys have been celebrating Yom Yerushalayim. We in Israel have been celebrating Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Day. There are many miracles connected to Jerusalem Day, right? Of course, we got back all of these incredible places, the old city, the Western Wall, Gush Etzion, the Shomron, right? So many places that we returned to. We, of course, had the miracle of winning the war, of not having too many casualties. Thank God, people had very dire predictions of what was going to happen before the Six-Day War. Those did not materialize, but there are also smaller miracles. And one of the smaller miracles of the war is this one, the opportunity to excavate a place that has so much rich history, but we didn't have a chance to really see what was there before because it was all built up. And we're going to explain why there was this opportunity right after the Six-Day War, and then kind of take a trip around the Jewish quarter to see what's discovered. So the picture that I brought you here is just one example. This is incredibly beautiful paint, original 2,000-year-old fresco painted walls from houses of the Kohanim, of the priests in Second Temple Jerusalem. We're going to come back to these houses, but I thought this was a nice place to start. Let's understand where we are going. Okay, so we are talking about the Jewish quarter, right? And this is a nice map because, oh, I don't have the annotating. All right, not bad. Okay, doesn't matter. Take a look down here in the bottom right corner. Okay, you have a whole map of the old city, right? We're familiar with how the map of the old city looks. This is the Temple Mount over here on the right. Now you have the various quarters. The blue is the Jewish quarter. And that's where we are going to be, the Rova, the Jewish quarter. Okay, we are going to be exploring various things there. So here you have the Western Wall Plaza, the Dung Gate. This is on the bottom. We are going to be up here on the top of the hill, and we're going to be looking at various sites. Okay, the Cardo, right over here. Okay, the Chorva synagogue we're going to discuss a little because it's part of the story of how things were discovered. The Wall Archaeological Museum. 4 over here, the Broad Wall. 5, the burnt house, right? All of these are places in the center of the Jewish quarter. And that's really where we are going to be located for the next a little less than an hour. Okay, so what we're looking at here is we have a great photograph from before 1948. Okay, this picture before 1948 shows us, well, of course, we see the Dome of the Rock over here, right? And we have the Western Wall down at the bottom, okay? But you could also see the Jewish quarter, and the Jewish quarter is very, very dense. Okay, you might be able to pick out 2 of the main buildings in the quarter. This one over here on the bottom, this is the Churva Synagogue, which has been rebuilt in the past 15 or so years. And this one over here on the right, similar kind of architecture, this is called the Tiferet Yisrael Synagogue, also right now in the midst of being rebuilt. Okay, but you have this incredibly dense urban area. Now, everybody assumes that there's lots of archaeology underneath because people have been living up on this hill, right? This is called the upper city or the western hill, right? People have been living up there for centuries, probably for millennia, but nobody really knows what's underneath because you can't just go and dig under people's houses. This is not allowed to do that, right? Nobody wants you to do that. So up until 1948, there was a lot of conjecture about what was underneath the houses and the buildings of the Jewish
Excuse me,
quarter.
Shulie, the
But
point
nobody
that
was
doesn't seem,
able.
Shulie, excuse me, the point that
Yeah,
doesn't seem to be working, the pointer seems to be a problem.
the arrow.
The
Yeah,
arrow,
I
yeah.
don't know why for some reason, usually you have a thing to annotate. Yours does not seem to have that. I don't know why, but mostly we're not going to need it so much. So I think we'll be okay. I don't know if who's doing the tech stuff, Larry, if he wants to see if there's a way to add annotating, but I think we can manage. Basically, you want to be looking at these 2 buildings with the domes on the bottom. Those are the 2 synagogues. Mostly, we're not going to need to point out too many things. Okay, so this is a situation 1948, right? The eve of the War of Independence. In the War of Independence, the Jewish quarter comes under incredible attack. 6 months of attack. They're besieged by the Arabs all around them. And finally, at the end of May 1948, the Jews surrender to the Jordanians. They evacuate the Jewish quarter. The men are taken prisoner to Jordan. The women, the children, the elderly are taken out to the new city. And what the Jordanians do to show that they are in control is they blow up the major buildings in the quarter. So what you're looking at in this picture is the remains of the Churva synagogue, that really big, impressive synagogue. They blow it up, becomes a churva, right? It becomes destroyed. It has that name from before, but this is the second time that it becomes destroyed. They blow up the Churva synagogue. They blow up the Tiferet Yisrael synagogue. Other important buildings are destroyed, desecrated, fall apart. And basically what happens is they don't build very much. And then when we get the old city back in 1967, suddenly there's an opportunity. There's an opportunity that nobody really had ever foreseen, which is now we don't have these important buildings standing in the way. All we have are some old housing, right? Courtyards, mostly kind of slummy, nothing that anybody really needs to preserve. Nobody's living there because the Arabs have run away. The Jews have not yet returned. And suddenly we have an opportunity to see what's underneath. Okay. Now, in the beginning, it wasn't so clear what was going to be done with the Jewish quarter. There were all kinds of suggestions. There was an organization that was founded for the development of the Jewish Quarter Development Company. It still exists today. And there were all kinds of suggestions. They said maybe we should build a huge synagogue here. Maybe we should rebuild everything the way it was, and it should be like a living museum. Maybe we should have all the religious offices of the state of Israel here in the Jewish Quarter. But very soon it became obvious that there was a lot of archaeology to be discovered. And they said, let's see what's happening with the archaeology. While we're doing that and while we're excavating, we will also be building, because the goal was not to create a Jewish quarter that was a museum, but rather to find all these exciting things, display them, but also have people actually live there, right? Families move in, synagogues be built, grocery stores, tourists, right? The way the Jewish quarter is today. Now, the person who was chosen to lead this enormous project of archaeology is this gentleman here, Nachman Avigad. Nachman Avigad was one of the earliest archaeologists. He's one of the founders of the Department of Archaeology in Hebrew University. Right? He comes, he's born in Europe. He comes in the 1920s to the land of Israel, and he starts already working in archaeology. By 1967, he isn't such a young man anymore, but he's a very, very accomplished archaeologist, and he's given the offer to take over these excavations of the Jewish quarter. Now, on the one hand, he's very excited, right? And this is a quote from his book. It seemed the old city would never reveal its secrets, and only an extraordinary event would create a situation where it would be possible to do serious excavations in Jerusalem. That extraordinary event, of course, was the War of Independence. So on the one hand, he's very excited. He knows they're going to find a lot. On the other hand, he's kind of daunted, right? This is a very large undertaking. He doesn't know how it's going to work, what they're going to find, how it's going to be practical, because they're going to be excavating and building at the same time. Those two things are diametrically opposed to each other. How are we going to do this? And he's sort of hesitant. He wants to take a sabbatical. How is this going to work? And, they reassure him. They say, no, you'll work for a year. You'll work for 2 years. Then you'll take your sabbatical. You'll write your book. In the end, he starts digging in 1968. The excavations go on until 1982. Okay, it doesn't take off after a year or two. And unlike, if anybody knows anything about archaeological excavations, usually you work 6 weeks, 8 weeks in the summer. Then everybody goes back to the lab. They wash the pottery. They write their reports. Here they worked round the clock, round the year. They worked about 8 to 10 months a year because they were working against the clock, right? Because the buildings were going up, the infrastructure was being put in, and they had to do as much as they could before it was too late. Okay? We're going to come back and see the pictures in a minute, but it's helpful to have a little bit of a timeline because we're going to be jumping around in a lot of different time periods. Okay? So we talked about 48 and 67. Those are the last 2 lines in my timeline here. But the other lines are all of the different time periods that the Jewish quarter was flourishing during those time periods. So what we're going to see is Nachman Avigad is going to discover remains, look up at the top of the timeline, from the end of First Temple times. That's very important. He's going to discover that the city grew to this hill already at the end of First Temple times. Early Second Temple times, the Jewish quarter was outside the city. The city had shrunk, was very small. But by the time we get to the time of Hanukkah and afterwards, the late Second Temple period, now this is a very important part of the city of Jerusalem. It's the home of very wealthy Kohanim who build very elaborate and beautiful homes. With the temple being destroyed in the year 70, okay, Jerusalem enters a new period. No more Jews. Romans, eventually Christians, Byzantines. The main street of the city becomes the Cardo. We're going to see Avigad discovers that too. There are a lot of churches. When the Arabs come in, Christians move out of the Jewish quarter. We have Jews called the Karaites who come to Jerusalem. We're not going to talk about them so much today, but here they are in the timeline. In Crusader times, the Jews are kicked out of the city again. Okay, but in the Jewish quarter, there's a marketplace. There are churches. When the Muslims kick out the Crusaders, when the Mamluks come along, the Jews come back. Ramban Nachmanides revitalizes the Jewish quarter. We have new synagogues that are being built. In the Ottoman period, we have more synagogues, the Churva, the Tiferet Israel. But by the end of the Ottoman period, Jews start to move out of the city. Okay, so we still have Jews living in the city up until 1948, but it's not the main place where people live anymore. People are moving outside the walls. 1948 to 67, no Jews in the old city at all, completely off limits to Jews. It becomes part of Jordan. And only in 1967 do we return. Okay, so that's just to give us a bit of an outline of what's happening. Don't worry if you didn't get all of it. We're going to be coming back to it as we go along. Okay, the first thing that needed to be solved by Nachman Avigad was to figure out at what point does Jerusalem grow? Okay, Jerusalem begins about 5,000 years ago, not in the area of the walls of the city, but down. And if you don't see the pointer, what you want to be looking at is on the right towards the bottom. There's a blue that says City of David. Okay, that's the beginnings of Jerusalem. Jerusalem starts there because that's where the water is. Okay, eventually it grows to the north to where the Temple Mount is. But then there was a big question: at what point does the city grow to this Western Hill, this area of the Jewish quarter of today? And there were two schools of thought: minimalists who said, not until Second Temple times, the city doesn't grow. First Temple times, it's a little narrow city, and there's nobody on the Western Hill. And then you had maximalists who said, no. By First Temple times, there's a whole settlement on this hill. Now, everybody had very strong opinions, right? As Jews tend to have, right? Minimalists were sure they were right. The maximalists were sure they were right. Nobody had any proof because nobody had excavated on this hill, and nobody could say were people living there or not. So Nachman Avigad says one of the first problems that he wants to solve, not the first, but one of the most important problems that he wants to solve, is when did people move and settle on this hill? Now, how do you solve that problem? You have to look not for stuff, right? Not for dishes, pottery, jewelry. All those things are very nice, but that doesn't prove that people were living somewhere. It proves that people were visiting there, that they left stuff there. What proves that people were living somewhere? If you have buildings, houses, and even better, if you have the wall of the city. Okay, and that's what Avigad discovers. Right? He discovers what you're seeing in this picture here, which today is in the heart of the Jewish quarter. Today it's actually being fixed up, restored. I don't know exactly what they're doing, but a lot of it is covered up. But you are looking at what's called the Broad Wall. And it is a very broad wall. It's a very large city wall. If you look at the blue and white marker on the wall next to it, right on the modern wall, you can see that marker goes 8 meters high. That's how tall we think this wall was. So this is a very high, very broad wall. And this, based on the pottery that we found next to it and the style of building, this is the wall of the city from the time of King Hezekiah, Chizkiyahu, the end of First Temple times, okay? The end of First Temple times, we have a wall of the city up in the hill here. That means people are living here already. And Avigad was overjoyed to discover this because here we go. That answers our big question of minimalist versus maximalist. Now, actually, let's go back here for a second. A question that we could ask that's connected to this: why does the city grow in the time of Chizkiyahu, right? Now, what do we know about Chizkiyahu? Who is he? Hezekiah. He's a righteous king. He lives in, he rules in the 700s before the Common Era, okay? And during his time period, during his time, the great enemy of the Jewish people is an empire called the Assyrians. The Assyrians are very, very powerful. They come from the northeast, okay, eventually where Babylonia is, but the Assyrians come first. They come to the land of Israel. They conquer the whole north of the land. By this point, the land has been divided into a kingdom of Israel and a kingdom of Judah. They conquer the kingdom of Judah. They exile all the people who are there, the 10 tribes, and then they come to the south. They conquer the kingdom of Israel. Sorry if I said that wrong. They conquer the kingdom of Israel, and then they come south to the kingdom of Judah, and they say to King Hezekiah, you know what, you can stay in your land. We're not going to exile you, but you have to pay taxes, okay? Now, Hezekiah, first of all, there are refugees that are coming into the city from the kingdom of Israel, people who managed to escape, who weren't exiled. Where are they going to go? They're going to go to Jerusalem. And that's what they do. And so the city grows. There's not enough room on that little narrow hill. So the city grows. But another thing happens. Chizkiyahu decides that he pays taxes for a while. And then he says, I'm going to rebel against the king of Assyria, which is a little crazy because the king of Assyria is this massive empire. We're this tiny little country. But what does he say? God's on my side. I'll be okay. But just in case, I'm going to build a wall. I'm going to divert the water, right? I'm going to do all these things to protect the city. Now, we have a great proof of this, okay? Time of Chizkiyahu, of Hezekiah, the prophet at the time is Isaiah, Yeshayahu. And Isaiah is not so pleased with all the things that Chizkiyahu does. And what does he say? You have a verse where it says, you counted the houses of Jerusalem and you pulled houses down to fortify the wall. Okay, Chizkiyahu builds a city wall. In the natural course of events, when you're building a huge government building project, somebody's house is going to be in the way. So you come to the house and you say, this is what we say today in America, we call it eminent domain. You say, listen, my wall is going to run right through your house. So you've got a week to empty out your house. And then we're going to knock down your house or just build the wall over your house. And goodbye, you'll find somewhere else to live. When they excavated the wall, right next to the wall, they found someone's house on the outside of the wall, right? So it clearly was not part of the city anymore. But this is what Yeshayahu was talking about, that the houses of the city were destroyed in order to build the wall. Now, what actually happens with the Assyrians? Okay, the Assyrians show up. They conquer many of the cities of Judah, and then they come to Jerusalem and they see this wall. Big deal. They're not impressed. They're an incredibly powerful, terrifying, cruel army. And we have, this is a very important story. It's such an important story that we have it in 3, maybe 4 places in Tanakh, right? In the book of Kings, in the book of Chronicles, in the book of Isaiah, maybe in the book of Micha also. Okay. And it tells us that the Assyrian soldiers come, they stand outside the walls, right? Here's the wall. They stand outside. They call up to the Judean soldiers on the wall. They say, you think your God's going to save you? Your God's not going to save you. There's no way he can defeat Sancheriv, the Sennacherib, the king of Assyria. You are totally going to be defeated. You're going to be taken into exile. You should just surrender now. And the Jews are very nervous. And even King Hezekiah, who was very tough, he's getting nervous too. And he goes to the prophet Isaiah, says, what's going to happen? And Isaiah says, don't worry, God's not going to destroy the city. And in the Bible, it says that the very next morning, the Assyrian army has dropped dead, right? A plague, something else. Now, we could say, okay, that's the way the Bible put a nice spin on the story. But did that really happen? So we have 2 proofs that it really did happen. Number 1, nothing is destroyed in this time period. When an army comes and destroys a city, conquers a city, there's massive destruction. It's very easy to see. And in fact, 100 years after this event, the Babylonians come, they destroy the city. We see that everywhere. Okay. But there's no destruction layer from this time in Jerusalem. Not only that, the king, Sennacherib, he writes, like kings do, he writes a list of his conquests, right? I conquered this one, I conquered that one, I conquered the other one. This is on a stone prism, which is what you're seeing here. And he writes, and as to Hezekiah, king of Judah, I shut him up like a bird in a cage. Okay, what does that mean? That means the siege went really well. Sancheriv, like all leaders, right, from when they chiseled things on stone to when they send out messages on Twitter, no leaders ever want to admit defeat. So they put a spin on the bad things that happened. So what does he say? I shut him up like a bird in a cage. I did a great siege. What a siege it was. It was the best siege ever. Did he defeat me? Did I defeat him? Did I conquer a city? No, but we don't want to talk about that, right? So even the Assyrian chronicles acknowledge that the city was not destroyed. So Nachman Avigad discovers the wall of the city. Very, very important. Not far from there, he also discovers a tower that's also part of the fortifications of the city from First Temple times. Okay, this tower is down in a valley. They had to excavate down. They excavated 10 meters, 30 feet down. They didn't find anything, but the archaeologists had said, we are going to excavate down to bedrock. Okay, so they kept going another 2 meters. By the time they were 12 meters down, suddenly little bits of stone start to peep out of the ground. And they keep excavating, of course, and they found this tower. So that's another really amazing part of the fortifications of the city in First Temple times. we're now going to shift gears. We are going to move from First Temple times to Second Temple times. Probably the most impressive of all of the remains that were found in the Jewish quarter are the remains from the last 100 years of the Second Temple, right? We're talking about the end of the 1st century before the Common Era to the year 70 of the Common Era. Those last 100 years, the city is rich. It's large. It's its largest that it's going to be until the 19th century. It's got travelers, pilgrims coming from all over the world to see it. It's got a beautiful temple, and it's got a lot of wealthy people. Okay, now Avigad discovers a whole bunch of houses that are grouped together, a neighborhood of 6 houses together, all of them with elaborate decorations and many things that indicate to us that these are houses of the Kohanim, of the priests. And we'll come to how the Kohanim are able to afford houses like this in a minute. Okay, it's right off of a street in the Jewish quarter that's called Mizgav Ladach, right, which means a refuge for the indigent, for the poverty-stricken. And Avigad's joke was really, it should not have been called Mizgav Ladach, but Mizgav Lagvir, a refuge for the Gvirim, right? The really wealthy, the machers, the important people, because that's the houses that we're going to see here. A neighborhood of 6 houses, each of them together. And it gives us an amazing insight into what everyday life was like 2,000 years ago. Okay. Now, yes, these were very, very rich people. So it's like, sort of getting an insight into everyday life by going to see, I don't know, Trump's house. Okay. But still, it tells us furniture, decorations, what was important to people. Okay. So we have incredibly beautiful decorations, right? You could see here these mosaics with a few very interesting elements to them. Okay, these are very rich people, and their style in many ways is very Roman, right? This is Roman times. And that means they have their dining room is set up like a Roman or a Greek dining room. They have a very fancy bathhouses in the basements of their houses. They have mosaics on their floor, but few things that are very different. Unlike the Romans, who have mosaics with animals, with people, with all kinds of images, with gods, these guys, no imagery, just geometric designs, flowers, but absolutely no animals, no people, definitely no gods. Okay. Not only that, they have a lot of things that are made out of stone. You can see in the picture here, the table and the jugs underneath. And they have many, many mikvaot, ritual baths. Every house has 2, 3, 4 mikvaot. Okay. We'll come back to that in 1 second. Okay. But you could see some of the details here, which are so beautiful. These capitals of these pillars, right? Very fancy tiled floors, right? The only other place we have this particular design of tiles, right? It's called opus sectile. It was all the rage in Rome. The only other place we have it is in the palace of King Herod. Okay. So this is super fancy. If House Beautiful, right, or House and Garden existed 2,000 years ago, these houses would get a big spread in the magazine. So this is houses of wealthy people who are very happy to keep up with the latest styles with certain rules that they're following. Okay, no images and very strong emphasis on purity, ritual purity. So the picture on the left here, this is one of the many, many mikvahs. Now, I want you to understand, Jerusalem today as well, definitely 2,000 years ago, there's not a lot of water. There's one spring in Jerusalem, okay? Where are you getting the water for all of these mikvaot? You have to take from rainwater. There are also aqueducts, although that's not good for a mikvah. You have to take a very scarce resource for your house. That's already telling you something about how important and how wealthy these people are, okay? On the right, you have all kinds of dishes and things that are made out of stone, okay? Stone is much more difficult to make things out of than pottery. Okay, it lasts longer, but it takes a much longer time to make. It's very hard to make. So therefore, it's more expensive. These guys have it partly as a status symbol because everybody wants things that are more expensive and fancier, but also because we have a very important rule in Jewish law that clay and wood and metal can all become impure, right? Somebody drops dead in the kitchen, your clay dishes, your pottery, that's it. Forget it. You can't use it anymore. It's impure. It has to be smashed. But stone stays pure. So if you are a Kohen, you are someone who has to serve in the Beit HaMikdash, you're going to eat from the sacrifices. You're going to eat from the gifts of that the Kohanim received. You have to do all those things in purity. So you are very, very, very careful about keeping your body pure. That's the mikvah. About keeping your dishes pure, keeping your house pure. All those things are very, very important. So we have people who are in the absolute elite upper class, but very concerned about things that Romans don't care about. So these are not Roman houses. These are clearly Jewish houses, and it seems clear that they are also houses of Kohanim. And that's where we get to a very interesting question. How do Kohanim have all this money, right? Where did Kohanim get money from? Kohanim, in the time of the first temple, in the time of the second temple, they don't own land. They don't get a portion of the land. Where does their money come from? It comes from the people. People bring sacrifices. They give the Kohanim some of the sacrifices. You have a field and you have your produce. You have to give some to the priests and some to the Levites. But that doesn't make you rich. How did these guys get so rich? And we have not just hints, but outright statements all over the Gemara about how there were certain Kohanim, not all Kohanim, but there was a class of Kohanim who were very corrupt. Okay, you have to understand that the Beit HaMikdash is a source of tons of money. Okay, there's all kinds of, first of all, lots of treasures in the temple, but also all kinds of contracts, right? Think about it today. If you're in, I don't know, the defense industry, right? And you happen to have a cousin who is connected to the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of State, and he can get you a contract, you're going to do very well. Same thing here. You had Kohanim who took a cut of whatever was coming into the Beit HaMikdash, whether it was oil or wood or wine or sacrifices. We know there's tons of corruption. We know it not just from these beautiful houses, but from what the Gemara says. I could have brought you many Gemaras. I brought you this one, this Tosefta. Okay. Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta said, right, this is something that we are more or less familiar with. Why was Shiloh destroyed, right? The tabernacle in Shiloh, because they treated holy offerings disgracefully. Why was the first temple of Jerusalem destroyed? Because of idolatry, sexual immorality, and spilling of blood, murder. But in the second one, the second temple period, they labored in Torah and were careful with tithes, right? We know that in the Second Temple times, as we saw, they're super careful about images. They're super careful about purity. They knew a lot of Jewish law. They were very careful with everything they did. Why was the Second Temple destroyed? Why were they exiled? Very sharp, because they loved money and they hated each other. All right, that's pretty sharp. That's pretty awful. All right, and Nachman Avigad really is finding the remains of that by seeing all the wealth that's in these houses that largely came through not the most kosher means. Okay, before we get to what happens to these houses, just one other thing that's fascinating that's on display here. It was discovered in a different house, but they put it on display in these houses of what's called the Herodian Quarter. They found an image of the menorah. Okay, you can see in the picture on the left here, the part on the right is the original kind of a drawing that was chiseled into the stone. The part on the left was added in. We also have remnants of a drawing of the altar and of the shulchan, the table that had the showbread on it. Why did someone draw this, make this like graffiti on his wall? We don't really know, but it's an eyewitness view of what the menorah looked like, right? These are guys who served in the temple. They lived a 5-minute walk away from the temple. They knew what the menorah looked like, and somebody came home and made a picture of it on his wall. Now, if you look at it carefully, you can see that the base of the menorah is a triangular base. Our other very famous picture, we have a lot of pictures of the menorah, but another very famous picture of the menorah is in the picture on the right here. That's the drawing, not the drawing, the relief on the Arch of Titus in Rome, showing the Roman soldiers carrying away the vessels of the temple, most famously carrying away the menorah. And the base there looks very different, right? It's got this much more kind of built up, elaborate base. Which one is correct? It's a good question. Did it change maybe at some point? The one on the right from the Arch of Titus is the symbol of the state of Israel today. Really, should it be the one on the left? Probably, but nobody's changing it so fast. Okay, another house that Avigad discovered right across the way. It's called the Burnt House. Why is it called that? It's also one of these houses of the Kohanim. It also has mikvahs. It also has stone dishes. It also has all different kinds of interesting artifacts. But what made it very, very powerful for the archaeologists was everything was covered with a thick layer of ashes. They found that in the houses we talked about before too, but here it was really everywhere. And this was one of the first places they discovered. And Avigad says, well, what does that mean? Why are there ashes everywhere? Could it be that these are ashes from the destruction of the city in the year 70? Okay, the Romans come, Tisha B'Av, destroy the temple, but we know they then go up to the upper city and they destroy the houses that are there. Maybe this is from the destruction of the temple. We'll come back to that in a second, but one of the things that he discovered in this house was a weight that had on it the words Dibar Katros, okay, belonging to Katros, okay, or the son of Katros. We have another Gemara that talks about this family. Okay, and again, it's talking about the corrupt Kohanim with regard to the prominent priests and those like them. Abba Shaul ben Botnit said in the name of Abba Yossi ben Chanin, woe to me due to the high priests of the house of Baitos. Woe to me due to their clubs, right? They would beat people up. Woe to me due to the high priests of the house of Chanin. Woe to me due to their whispers, right? They would spread rumors about people and get them in trouble. Woe to me due to the high priest of the house of Katros, exactly these guys. Woe to me due to their pens, right? What did these guys do? These guys were connected to everybody. Look at the bottom. The power of these households stemmed from the fact that the fathers were high priests, the sons were the temple treasurers, the son-in-laws were temple overseers, and their servants strike the people with clubs. This is the classic example of nepotism. You appoint people in your family, you keep power in the family. Anybody who threatens that power, you tell on them to the Romans. And this is the Gemara saying this, right? This is not any contemporary scholar that's trying to, break myths. This is the Gemara that's saying this. These guys were not so great, right? And we're finding that this is the house of Katros. This is where it is. Now, when Avigad discovers the ashes, he also discovers a spear. You can actually see it in the very middle of the picture. And he discovers skeleton, a piece of a skeleton. And he says to himself, could it be that this is from the final battles for the city? And he says to himself, maybe I'm imagining things. Maybe I'm making things more elaborate than they are. Maybe this is not at all what happened here. And he says he called in all sorts of archaeologists to take a look, and everybody agreed with him. They said the pottery is from the 1st century of the Common Era. There clearly was a great destruction, a great fire that happened here. There clearly was something violent. We have weapons here. This is from the destruction of the city, from Churban Bayit Sheni, from the destruction of the Second Temple. And Avigad writes about how people were overwhelmed. They were so blown away by this that they would come by, they would volunteer to work on the excavations. They would ask if they could take home a little bit of the ashes that were there to remember the destruction of the temple. And he says, this is here, we Jews, for centuries, we talk about the destruction of the temple. We read about it. We cry about it. We commemorate it. But here there was something not abstract, not written, not literary, not prayer, but something very physical. Actual ashes from the destruction of the temple made it very, very real for people. Okay, we are moving forward in time, okay? And one of the discoveries that Nachman Avigad made, which is very interesting, is the Cardo. Why is it so interesting? Because he knew he was going to discover it. What's the Cardo? The Cardo is a long boulevard, right? A very beautiful wide street that bisected the old city from the south of the city to the north of the city. It's not built in Second Temple times. Second Temple times, the major street of the city is the street near the temple. But here, this is a street that's in the middle of today's city. Okay, when the Romans destroyed the temple, first of all, they dump a ton of stones down on that main street, and it's very hard to build anything. But second, they don't care about the temple and the site of the temple. It's not important to them. The Byzantines, the Christians that come after them, they also don't care about the temple. They care about the new church that they built, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is in the Christian quarter of today. And they want a major street that's going to be good for processions and parades, and for all the pilgrims that are coming are going to have stores. And they want to be able to have that street. And that's why they build this street very close to the church called the Cardo. Now, what's interesting about the Cardo is that we've discovered the archaeological remains of it, but we don't even need the archaeological remains because this is still the main street of the old city. Okay, the Muslim shuk, much of the shuk of today is the Cardo, just carved up into 3 smaller pieces. Now, this is a mural that was made, that was put in the Cardo about 10 years ago. It's meant to give you a little bit of a feeling of what things were like there. Now, this was a major street, open to the sky, stores on either side, very busy, very bustling. Also, this mural is very fun because if you look in the lower right-hand corner, you can see a visitor from the future. See the little boy with his water bottle peeking out of his knapsack. This is a very busy street 1,500 years ago. You could hear many languages, see many types of people. What's the one group you would not have seen on this street 1,500 years ago? Jews. Because the Romans and the Byzantines after them, they make Jerusalem empty of Jews. After the Jews rebel twice, once with the temple being destroyed in the Great Revolt, then 65 years later with the Bar Kokhba revolt, the Romans say, enough, we're fed up with you Jews, no more coming back to Jerusalem. So Jerusalem is, Judenrein is empty of Jews until the Muslims come. So this street, which is busy, which is bustling, which is full of life, didn't have any Jews on it. Now, oh, and this is a nice, cute little thing in the corner of the mural, right? If you look in the far left corner, okay, you can see there are 2 guys. There's really a third one. I cut him off, but here we'll see him together. Okay, all the people in the picture, I just kind of made up faces. But in the corner, the artist said, let's have a little fun. Let's put these 3 nice Jewish faces in. Okay, and yes, we said there were no Jews there in the olden days. But in the mural, we put in a few Jews, and you have these 3 guys, okay, on the right with the blue robe. That is, some people might even recognize him. That's Teddy Kollek. He was the mayor of Jerusalem from 66 till, I don't remember, like 95, a very long time. To his left with the very nice maroon and gold robe, that's Nachman Avigad, the archaeologist. And the guy in between with the yellow robe, that's Hillel Geva. He was another one of the archaeologists, Yibadel L'chaim. He's the only one of the 3 who's still alive. And they got put into the mural just as a bit of fun. Okay, but the other thing that's very, very interesting about the Cardo, Nachman Avigad, when he started to excavate, he really didn't know what he was going to find. The only thing he knew he was going to find was the Cardo. How did he know he was going to find it? Because he had a picture of what it looked like 1,500 years ago. Pretty neat, right? In Jordan, in the 19th century, in a town called Madaba or Medva, okay, it was a discovery made of an ancient church, okay, a church from 1,500 years ago. And this church, the floor of the church was covered with a huge mosaic map of the land of Israel. Why? Because the land of Israel is very holy to Christians. Maybe they were going to come on a trip and visit it, or maybe they weren't ever going to visit it, but this way they could imagine what it looked like. And part of this map, a very important part of this map, is what it says in Greek above it, Hagia Polis Jerusalema, the holy city of Jerusalem. And if you look at this map, you can see running right down the middle is a street with pillars on either side, going from south to north. North is Damascus Gate, Shar Shechem. Okay, there's a pillar here with a statue on top. That was the pillar that was put up for the Roman Emperor Hadrian. Even today, this gate is called by the Arabs Bab al-Amud, the gate of the pillar, even though the pillar hasn't been there for centuries. Okay? But this street was so important. It appears here on the map, and Nachman Avigad knew he was going to uncover it. By the way, sharp eyes will notice that there's another street with pillars right on top of it. That's called the Eastern Cardo. That was discovered about 20 years ago. Right, so Nachman Avigad uncovered the Western Cardo more than 50 years ago. And then later on, we discovered the Eastern Cardo. So he knew he was going to find it, and he did. Okay. This is another piece of the Cardo, and this is where we learn about how the Romans and then the Christians did not allow the Jews to come into the city. We have a very nasty commentary by a church father named Jerome from the 4th century. And he tells us that this decree of the Romans kept on being done in Christian times, right? Listen to what he says. Until today, it has been forbidden for those poisonous hypocrites, that's Jews, to enter Jerusalem because of their murder of the prophets, including the last one, the Son of God. Right? That Jerome is ascribing all of this, even though this is not why the Romans did it, but he's saying it's all because the Jews didn't believe in Jesus. They may come only to cry, because then they are permitted to mourn the ruins of the city in exchange for payment. So Jews are allowed to enter the city, as we're going to see in a minute, only one day a year. They have to pay. Okay, just as they once bought the blood of the Messiah, now they buy their own tears, and even mourning is not given them for free. What day in the year are they allowed to come to the city? Think about it as a Christian who wants to persecute the Jews. You can come to cry. So when do you come? The 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av. On the day that the Romans conquered and destroyed Jerusalem, you could see the members of this nation, women wearing rags and old men carrying a burden of rags and years, gathering to mourn and proving by their bodies and their clothes the meaning of the anger of the Lord, right? They are so poverty-stricken and so miserable because you rejected Christianity. A collection of miserable rabble appears while the cross of the Lord shines and celebrates his resurrection, and on the Mount of Olives is raised a cross. Meanwhile, this pathetic nation cries over its destroyed temple, and they are not worthy of pity. Right? This is not a very sympathetic account, but it does give us a sense of what the city was like when this Cardo was built, right, in the heyday of this time. Today, the Cardo is in the heart of the Jewish quarter. There's Jewish tourists and non-Jewish tourists who are coming through it night and day all the time. Very, very, very busy. Besides the mural that we saw, they added recently a very nice addition, which is these mosaics of what stores might have looked like along the sides of the Cardo. And they're giving you a sense of what things were like 1,500 years ago. You have the pottery store, the spices store, right? All different kinds. Okay, we are nearing the end, okay? When the Crusaders come to Jerusalem, they kick out the Jews, they build their own things. Okay? And we have the remains of a hospital. This picture on the left here is Crusader Hospital. It's on the side of the steps going down to the Kotel, if that looks familiar to anyone. At the top of those steps, where today there's all kinds of, fast food and tons of people sitting and eating, that was a marketplace in the time of the Crusaders. But again, no Jews living in the city at that time. Okay? And these are the main things that Nachman Avigad and his team discovered. But archaeology in the Old City is always continuing. Okay, there's always going to be more to discover. So I just brought you a few pieces from the last couple of decades of this continuing saga of archaeology. So we're finding more and more pieces of the wall of the city in First Temple times. Okay, so this is some pictures here on the left. We have pictures of the First Temple walls outside, like built into the walls from 500 years ago. The picture on the right is of an amazing excavation in a place called the Kishle, the Tower of David excavations near Jaffa Gate, where we found pieces of the wall from Turkish times, from Hasmonean times and from Hezekiah's times, right? All in the same place. We're also finding amazing stuff at the back of the Western Wall Plaza. Okay, so we are right after Yom Yerushalayim, when Jerusalem was reunited in 1967. The Israeli government and the army had exactly a week to prepare a space for all the thousands and thousands and thousands of people they knew were going to descend on the city for Shavuot, which is exactly a week after Yom Yerushalayim. So they just bulldozed and created a plaza. They bulldozed the houses. They didn't bother to do the archaeology. They didn't have time. But in the last 15 years or so, we've started to excavate, because now this is actually an old picture. Today there's a building on this site because they wanted to build a visitor center at the back of the Western Wall Plaza. So they did an excavation and they found that Eastern Cardo, and below that they found mikvaot from Second Temple times, and even a building that goes back to First Temple times. Okay, and one last thing, down in the city of David, they're always finding more and more things. And this is one of the very exciting things that's being discovered. The road, the main road down from the Shiloh pool going up to the Western Wall, right up to the walls around the Temple Mount, the Pilgrim's Road, right? The road that people would travel when they were coming on Aliyah L'Regel. So you really do have so many different discoveries, and archaeology is very much a continuing story in Jerusalem and all over Israel. That was to give you guys a taste. I don't know if people have questions, Rabbi Kranzler, if you want to relay questions that people have or comments, I am happy to hear.
The clapping gives you an idea how this went over. Does anybody have any questions that they want to ask? Nobody has any questions? Oh, 1 minute.
The road from Shiloh to the city that you just mentioned, there's a water times a road.
Can you hear that?
I did not hear that. Can you repeat it?
From Shiloh, from the Shiloh pool.
From the I'm sorry.
A waterway, some kind of waterway that we can walk through to go up to the city. So you end up near Robinson Gate, I think it was.
You want to do me a favor? Anybody has a question, please come up here, speak directly into the speaker. So
I could not hear. So if you can repeat it, Rabbi
please.
Kranzler, I would be happy to
Please
answer.
come up here if you have a question. I don't understand. I don't understand what you're saying. I'm sorry.
Come on up. Come on down. Oh, hello.
Hello. At Robbins, when you near the old city, near Robinson's not
Arch.
Robinson Gate Arch, that's what I'm thinking. There's a tunnel underneath that when you come out, you come out of Robinson's Arch.
Correct.
Okay, that is the road from the Shiloh pools that comes up? Is
From
that
the Shiloh pools, exactly. That's
And
exactly what we're
that's the road.
talking about. That's actually the sewers underneath the road. But yes, you can walk up from the Shiloh pool all the way up to Robinson's Arch. Today, you're only able to walk in the sewers underneath the street, but the city of David is working very hard that eventually the street itself is going to be open.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
You're
Anybody
welcome.
else would like to come up and ask a question? Otherwise, we'll say thank you very much. I'm glad. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, more questions.
Another question. Harold.
Come on up.
all
Let me
yours.
see. I like to see my audience. Hi.
Hi, the things that the Muslims destroyed on Har HaBayit and their own building. Can you give us an idea of what are the things we're finding? Because we Jews are sort of ingenious.
So,
We can
okay. So
take
just
certain
to
things and turn them
explain,
into gold.
so to explain the situation in case people don't know, okay, about, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, there was an illegal building project that happened underneath the Temple Mount. The Muslims came and kind of bulldozed and took out tons and tons of dirt to build a huge mosque. This is, of course, a very important site for archaeology because it's underneath the Temple Mount, but they didn't do anything with archaeology. They just dumped tons, literally tons of earth outside in the Kidron Valley. But as the questioner mentioned, right? The Yiddish cup, Jews have a way of turning disaster into at least something good. They took all of these tons of earth, they hauled them to a site on the Mount of Olives, and they started something called the sifting project, where we sift through this dirt to see what we can find. Now, it's actually an amazing thing because there's no way we would have been allowed to do an archaeological excavation underneath the Temple Mount that would have set off World War III. So at least here, even though it's not a real excavation, but we do get a chance to be able to find things. And we're finding things ranging from, Coca-Cola bottles from the time of the British Mandate all the way down to First Temple artifacts. Okay. And this is called the Sifting Project. There's all kinds of amazing stuff that they found. So I'll just give you, I'll give you a couple of examples. Okay. They found pieces, something that doesn't sound so exciting, pieces of mosaic tiles. Okay. But what the archaeologists were able to do when they got enough of these pieces was to figure out, what did the floor look like of the courtyard of the temple? That's pretty wild. Nobody discusses that. Nobody describes it in the Mishnah, but we have enough tiles that we can kind of figure out the patterns of the floor. So that's something that we discovered in the Sifting Project. Okay. We've discovered game pieces like dice from bored soldiers who were hanging around playing dice. Okay. We've discovered images of the menorah, really all kinds of exciting things. Anybody wants to know more, you can Google Sifting Project and they'll have like some of the highlights of some of the stuff that they found. So thank you. That was an interesting question.
Okay, the rabbi has another question at this time. Please pay attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Is it accurate to say that when you refer to the corruption that existed among the Kohanim, that a chunk of that really was due to people who were Kohanim who were wealthy already and bribed their way into the leadership with the ruling authority, often the Romans, and vice versa, that there were times that the Romans wanted to appoint those that they knew they could work with?
You're saying, are the rich getting richer? I would say yes, probably very true. Meaning we all know that it takes connections to have money and it takes money to have connections, and it's a cycle. And I will definitely say, and I'm sure we have at least a couple of Kohanim in the audience, this is not all the Kohanim. This is certain families. The Gemara is very clear about that. It's certain very elite, very wealthy families. And I think you're right. I think the rich do get richer. I think that makes a lot of sense.
That doesn't include rabbis. Anybody else?
Rabbis don't start out rich and they don't end up rich.
Oh, okay. Anybody else would like to ask a question? Here's your opportunity.
What's the best way to see?
Come up, please. Come up, please.
Thank you very much for this extraordinary tour. Question is, when a visitor to Yerushalayim, which I do from time to time, where do you think one should start or end or go in order to really appreciate this incredible tour?
Okay, so first what you have to do is hire a good tour guide. That's your first step.
I think
So if you hire me, I'm happy to take you. I will say that right now, I don't know if it's because it's a post-COVID thing, a lot of things are being renovated. So like those houses of the Kohanim, the Herodian Quarter, which is one of my favorite places to go, that's actually closed to the public right now because they're doing a renovation. When is it going to reopen? I don't know. But other things like the Broad Wall, the Cardo, you walk around the Jewish Quarter, they're right out there. You don't have to do anything special. You don't have to pay admission. It's right there. So there really is a lot that you can see. But yes, a good tour guide is always very helpful.
Thank you very much.
Does
Anybody else?
Haganah Teva still do tours?
Haganah Teva does do tours. They don't do so much archaeology. They do more nature. But yes, there are definitely tours all over. And the City of David has tours, and the Southern Wall excavations, all these places, the Kotel tunnels, right? There's all kinds of different things you can do.
That was a call from the outside. Anybody else? Anybody else? All right, thank you very, very much as usual.
Thank you to
We
you
were-
guys.
we were
Happy
delight- we were
Yom
delighted
Yerushalayim.
in the past, and we hope to have you in the future again. Thank you
Thank
very
you. It was a
much.
pleasure.
Take care. Everybody, please. We have refreshments outside. There's plenty for everyone, so you don't have to rush. But I'm glad that you enjoyed it, and I'm glad that you came here today. Welcome and enjoy. Take care.
Thank you so
Take
much.
care. Take care. Thank you very much. Where's Larry? Larry, is he around where you can shut them? Okay. Larry? Worked beautifully. It worked beautifully.
It was a
Thank
good
you.
venue too. The venue was good.
What's that?
The setup was very
The
good.
whole